Hello, my name is Colombage and I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Melbourne. Today I'll be talking about one of my studies, a cross-sectional study investigating the prevalence, distress and impact of pelvic floor dysfunction in women with and without breast cancer. I would like to acknowledge my PhD supervisors and our clinical collaborators involved in this project. I do not have any conflicts to disclose. There is some evidence that women with breast cancer experience pelvic floor dysfunction. However, the exact pathophysiology of this is unknown. Therefore, we have proposed a pathway linking breast cancer and pelvic floor dysfunction. The mechanism is presumed to be as a result of breast cancer treatments, including chemotherapy and endocrine therapy. There is evidence that these treatments lead to ovarian suppression and failure, which then leads to estrogen suppression and pelvic floor dysfunction. Our systematic review showed that women with breast cancer experience bladder and bowel conditions at higher rates than women without breast cancer. However, the studies included in this review did not have a control group comparison and used cancer-specific questionnaires to assess the prevalence of pelvic floor conditions. Therefore, based on our findings and the gaps identified, we designed this cross-sectional study to compare the prevalence, distress, and impact of pelvic floor dysfunction. For the cohort of women with breast cancer, we included women who had undergone treatment for histologically confirmed breast cancer. We recruited these women from various outpatient clinics at a tertiary public hospital in Melbourne, Australia. For the cohort without breast cancer, we included women with no history of breast cancer. These women were recruited online from various social media sites. We collected socio-demographic data and medical history and assessed the presence and impact of pelvic floor dysfunction using two validated questionnaires, the Pelvic Floor Distress Inventory and the Pelvic Floor Impact Questionnaire. Our primary outcome was the presence of urinary incontinence, which was assessed using questions 16 and 17 of the PFDI. Our sample size was calculated based on our primary outcome of urinary incontinence. Assuming a 20% difference in prevalence rates between groups, 80% power, and an alpha of 0.05, we calculated a sample size of 240 participants in total. Data analysis followed a standard two-group comparison to identify differences between groups for socio-demographic variables, medical data, and questionnaire scores. Logistic and linear regression analyses were conducted to identify the factors associated with the presence, distress, and impact of pelvic floor dysfunction. Logistic models were adjusted for known confounders of pelvic floor dysfunction, including age, BMI, and parity. I will now present our results. We included 120 women with breast cancer and 170 women without breast cancer. The group of women with breast cancer were older and had a higher BMI. More women in the breast cancer cohort were postmenopausal than women without breast cancer. Women with any stage of breast cancer were included undergoing various types of treatment. Participants may have had more than one type of breast cancer treatment. This graph presents the percentage of women responding to either yes or no on the presence of urinary incontinence. In women with breast cancer, 74% reported urinary incontinence compared to only 57% in women without breast cancer. Logistic regression analysis showed an odds ratio of 1.10 after controlling for the known confounders of pelvic floor dysfunction. This was not statistically significant. Presented here is the distress summary score as measured by the PFDI. Although women with breast cancer reported a slightly higher distress than women without breast cancer, there was no significant difference between groups on this measure. Breaking distress scores down into the separate domains, we found that both cohorts reported the highest distress in the urinary domain, and women with breast cancer were significantly more distressed than women without breast cancer. Looking at the factors that were associated with the distress of pelvic floor dysfunction, multivariate regression models showed that being older and not having a university degree were the strongest predictors of distress of pelvic floor dysfunction. Having breast cancer was not associated with the distress of pelvic floor dysfunction. Here we're looking at the impact of pelvic floor dysfunction as measured by the PFIQ. Overall, women with breast cancer were significantly more impacted by pelvic floor dysfunction than women without breast cancer. Breaking this down further into the separate domains, again we found that women with breast cancer were significantly more impacted by urinary symptoms than women without breast cancer. Looking at the factors that were associated with the impact of pelvic floor dysfunction, multivariate regression models showed that not currently working, being a current smoker, and having breast cancer were the strongest predictors of impact of pelvic floor dysfunction. Having breast cancer was positively associated with impact scores, demonstrating that women with breast cancer reported a higher impact of pelvic floor dysfunction than women without breast cancer. This study found that women with breast cancer had a higher prevalence and impact of pelvic floor dysfunction than women without breast cancer. Given these findings, screening and management of pelvic floor dysfunction may be indicated in women with breast cancer. However, further studies are needed to identify the cancer treatment-specific factors affecting the prevalence, distress, and impact of pelvic floor dysfunction in women with breast cancer. Thank you.